Welcome to Widowed Too Soon, where real-life widows and widowers come together to share their stories of survival, faith, and the journey of finding hope in the darkest of times. Whether you're newly widowed or have been on this journey for some time, each week we're here to provide you with inspiration, practical advice, and the reassurance that you are not alone. You were made to not only survive, but thrive. And now here's your host, a woman who has walked this path herself, who finds solace in writing, joy in speaking, and freedom in dancing like nobody's watching. Michelle Bader Ebersole.
Hey podcast listeners, I'm excited to invite you to the Fall Faith Day on October 15th from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I am so privileged and honored to be one of the 57 speakers, and you don't want to miss the Fall Faith Day for encouragement, connection, and growth. You know what's awesome? It's actually live and it's free. So register today in the show notes and start selecting which sessions you want to attend. My topic is Faith Through the Fire, and I go live at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. The other sessions are going to be amazing as well. I'm so excited to share this virtual training with you. It's going to change how you experience God, life, and your faith. All of these godly women and speakers, along with me, are here to help you grow closer to God and understand His principles so you can experience your best life possible. So join me on Tuesday, October 15th. Register now. I hope to see you there. Welcome to Widowed Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole. I am excited. Yet again, we have a guest. I know you guys are loving these episodes. I've had so much positive feedback that you guys are loving hearing from different people. So I'm excited today to introduce to you Debbie Soushek. How are you today, Debbie?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having
yes,
me.
Yes, you're welcome. We're so excited to be here, to have you here. So we were talking a little bit before we started. We have like a crazy connection. I mean,
right?
crazy. So let's see if I have this right. Your daughter was friends with my niece, which was Luke's side, Luke's
Yep.
Niece. Is that correct?
That's
Did they
correct.
meet through school or?
Yeah, Katie and Lexi became friends really as soon as we moved here to where we live now. So they had been friends since like third or fourth grade. They actually met on the bus and became best buddies. And I can remember Katie get invited several times down to Oregon to go stay with Grandma Bader and see all of the Bader cousins. And so when I saw your name Bader and I saw that you were from that area, I'm like, is there any possibility we could have this connection? And sure enough, small world.
And then it is a small world. And then you're also really good friends with Karen. I'm going to say her last name wrong. Latham.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I always get so you're friends with her. So that's how you knew about the podcast, right? Because when she shared hers.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Karen and I, we don't know each other really well. We met. Actually, we attended the same church, and I had the opportunity during a women's event to share my story a little bit on a video and stuff. And she came up to me afterwards. She was fairly newly widowed at that point and said, I really appreciated everything you had to say, and I'd love to, get to know you better. And so that's how we got to know each other.
Okay. Yeah. Lots of connections. That's awesome. Well, I know you have a lot to share, so we're going to get right into your story.
Super.
So we usually start with, could you tell us about how you met your late husband and what life was like with him?
Sure. My late husband's name is John. I met him actually on a college age retreat. We attended the same church. And kind of leading up to that, I had been in a relationship for a while with a guy that I grew up with. And I would say he was my first love. And I honestly I think I was more in love with his family than I was with him looking back. They were like another set of parents to me. And we ended up breaking up. I was very young. Like I said, I had grown up with him. I was 18 or 19, I think, when we were dating. And I was devastated, absolutely devastated, because I had let a guy come between my relationship between myself and the Lord. And so I took about a couple of months of, doing some real soul searching, and God was very gentle with me during that time, and decided it was time for me to go back to church and be around people and get involved. So I joined the college age group, and we ended up going on a retreat. We would do that a couple of times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, I don't know, probably about 150 of us there. And they divide us into smaller groups with, inside the bigger groups, we'd get together for our discussions and mealtime and stuff like that. And then we had smaller groups that we called family groups. And so we get together in our very first family group, and here's this guy who I had never seen before, didn't know anything about him, where he was from. And as we went around and introduced ourselves and everything, I later found out he was a firefighter. And I was fascinated with him more than anything else because he was a little bit older than most of the people I, was used to seeing in the group. And he fascinated me because he had a house, he had a career. He wasn't just just fresh out of high school kid doing, basic data entry or something like that for a job. And so I just really appreciated the things that he had to say. He was a little bit older, was more mature. And so I was like, fascination is the best word that I can describe for that. And as it happened to turn out that weekend, I was working. I could not get off work on Saturday. So I had to leave early Saturday morning to go to my job. And so I missed the 2 sessions of family group on Saturday, but I was back in time for dinner. And when I came back, here he is on crutches. And I was like, oh, wow, what happened? Turns out he was playing football with the guys on free time or something and tweaked his knee. And he was kind of hurting a little bit, but just was really getting to know him a little bit more. It was also kind of fun because he was a firefighter, had his CDL, was able to drive people. He drove the bus to take everybody to and from the retreat, but I didn't take the bus. I had to drive my car because I had to leave for work. So we all get back from the retreat. A couple weeks later, a bunch of us that got to know each other in our family group went out we always had our college age group. I think it was on Thursday nights. We decided to go out for some dessert afterwards. And so he was in the group, and I was just really liking him more and more and stuff. And the funny thing is that I was like, where did you come from? I've grown up in this church my whole life. I've never seen you before. I've been in this college age group for 6+ months. How come I never saw you before? And he explained that he had recently started coming back to church again. He was raised in church too, but spent some time away and had decided he wanted to get things right with the Lord. So he started coming back to the college age group. So it was definitely one of those moments where God was preparing each of us for the right time that we would meet each other. So let's see, a couple weeks later after this dessert thing, a girlfriend and I were house sitting for her boss. And we decided we had met so many great people at this retreat that we were going to throw a big party and invite all of our college age groups. This house had some property. She had a huge bonfire area. So we were going to kind of do an end of the year thing and throw this bonfire. And we decided we were going to have, we would supply, we'd go to Costco, get all of the side dishes and everything, but everybody was supposed to bring their own meat to grill. And we asked volunteers to bring some grills. So we had all these grills lined up. Well, John worked at the fire station that was literally right around the corner from where this house was. So he volunteered to bring a grill. So he shows up at this party and he couldn't drive. Because he was on crutches. Turns out he blew out his knee. And so his buddy dropped him off with the grill. And so at this party, I got him all situated down around the campfire. And I'm like, okay, are you comfortable? Do you need any food? Can I bring you any stuff? And so we got, played the hostess and did all the things and then lit the campfire after it got dark. And I sat next to him at that campfire and we talked for probably hours, hour and a half, 2 hours at least. And just, it was amazing to me getting to know him, how many similarities we had in what we wanted in life and things like that. Developed a huge crush on him, of course. So the next day we had to clean up everything after people left. And lo and behold, there's one grill left sitting on this back deck. Well, it was the one that John had brought. And so I had to call him and say, I need you to come and get this grill. And you have to come and get it no later than tomorrow, because we're leaving because the people are coming back home. And Now, keep in mind, this was back in the late 80s. We didn't have internet. We didn't have,
Right. Uh-huh.
cell phones and all that kind of stuff. But what we did have
Yep.
was a paper list of a phone number of everybody that was in the college group.
Uh-huh.
And before the party started, we had a guy in our group who was a type 1 diabetic and was blind. He couldn't see,
Oh,
but he
wow.
really wanted to come to the party. So he would always, he lived on his own, but he would always have people pick him up, give him rides and stuff. So he called us up and he's like, "Hey, do you know anybody who lives in Bellevue?" Well, I knew that's where
Mm-hmm.
John lived. And so I read his name and phone number off of the list, and this guy's name was Troy. He had a tape recorder, and you would have to say it into the phone 3 times so that he could,
Funny.
memorize the number and all of that. So I
Uh-huh.
remember saying John's name,
Wow.
John Cahill, and reading his phone number 3 different times. This is before the party. So after we've all cleaned up, I got a call in about this grill. I went to find the list, and it is gone. Can't find it
Oh, no.
anywhere. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And so I just threw out this little Gideon prayer, and I'm like, okay, Lord, if I'm meant to talk to this guy, I'm going to remember the phone number. So
Wow.
I dialed the number, and he answered, and we ended up
Wow.
talking. Yeah, we ended up talking for about 45 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, he asked me out on a date. And
So cute.
so that was, I would say probably about a month in total after we had the retreat when I first met him. And so we went
Wow.
out on our first date, and again, he was on crutches. He was able to drive by then, but he took me to dinner and had to check his crutches at the door at this restaurant. It was really funny. But I knew probably on my second date with him that
Mm.
I was going to marry this guy. And I can
Wow.
remember having a conversation with the Lord later that night and I've heard the audible voice of God twice in my life, both times when
Oh,
it was
that's
telling
amazing.
me the men that I was going to marry. So anyway,
Wow.
yeah. So I heard God say that you're going to marry this guy someday. And so I remember pacing in my room. I still lived at home with my parents because I was 19, I think at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, Lord, this isn't funny. I don't appreciate this at all because I thought that I was going to marry this other guy. And now you're telling
Oh.
me on my second date that I'm going to marry this guy that I hardly know. Not funny. But, I was like, okay, I'm back in the land of the living now. I'm going to keep, seeing my friends. I'll keep dating him. But my attitude this time was vastly different. And I said, Lord, I don't ever want any man or any guy to ever come between you and me again. So every date that I had with John after that, my attitude was, if this is the last time that I ever get to spend with him, then I'll be thankful for what I did have
Mm.
and for what I did learn. But I wasn't going to assume that, God was going to tell me something that wasn't true. And so I knew on my second date, it took John about 9 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
But so we dated for 11 months, and we were engaged for 6 months, and we got
Mm.
married August 19th, 1989.
Wow.
So it was wonderful. He was the man of my dreams, the man that I had prayed for. Um, my whole life leading up to this point, all I ever wanted to do was to get married and to be a mom and to raise my family and just be the best wife and mom that I could be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had no aspirations for a career or anything like that. I just felt like God was telling me, I'm going to give you, this is going to be what I have for you. And so John and I had, basically a storybook romance, a storybook
Mm.
life. We went on to have 4 amazing kids. As I said, he was a firefighter, so we had a lot of time off.
Mm.
He basically worked 8 days a month. It was a 24-hour day,
Wow.
but we weren't um, what he liked to call weekend warriors, meaning we didn't have to go to the movies or do all of our shopping or things like that on
Right.
the weekend with everybody
Exactly.
else. We could do it during the
Uh-huh.
week, and it was great. So
Mm-hmm.
we just created a ton of memories with our family and with our kids, and that was our life, and we loved it. Like I said, it was exactly what I'd always wanted and what I thought forever was going to look like.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
And then on June 3rd, 2004, my life was radically changed forever when John died in a climbing accident on Mount Rainier.
Oh, wow.
So he was an avid climber. He's a very experienced climber. This would have been his 26th summit of the mountain. So it wasn't like he didn't know what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He was with a climbing partner who survived. But it was just like any other day, just like any other climbing trip. I can remember kissing him bye on the front porch. My older three were in school, and my youngest daughter was still at home because she was only 4 or 5 at the time, hadn't started kindergarten yet. And so he and his partner were getting all their stuff, together and sorting it all out, balancing out their packs and stuff. And then he left on, I think it was May 31st. He left to go climb the Liberty Ridge route on Mount Rainier, which is considered probably the hardest route there, but he had climbed it 5 or 6 times before. And like I said, back then, we had cell phones, but they weren't anything like we have now. They weren't smartphones or anything like that.
Right.
But I did talk to him I think the last time I talked to him was June 1st, like the next day. He called me and said, it's beautiful. We were scheduled to come home on June 2nd, but there's going to be a full moon and there's going to be a meteor shower. So we're going to stay a little extra time here and plan on summiting that night so we can see the meteor shower and the full moon, and we're going to climb by the light of the full moon, because that's a very common thing to do, because the ice is much colder in the middle of the night than it is during the day. The sun can soften it up. So I talked to him on June 1st, and then I got a text photo from him. It was just these were flip phones,
right.
So terrible grainy photo, but a photo of him the night before they started the climb because they went to bed about 7 to try and get some sleep, get up in the middle of the night and climb by the light of the moon. And so that morning that he was supposed to be summiting, I woke up in the morning, and I knew he was coming home later that day, because the trip down the mountain is much faster than up. And so I knew he was, the plan was he was going to come home later that day. So got the kids off to school, did my, my Bible study and my usual routine in the morning with coffee and whatnot. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get in the shower here pretty soon, just before, because I know he's spent all these days on the mountain. He's going to be exhausted. He's going to be tired. And I want to smell my best for him when he comes home. I remember thinking that. So I just stepped into the shower and my phone rang. And normally I wouldn't answer it, but something in my spirit said, go answer the phone. So got out of the shower, ran across the hall to the office where our phone was. We didn't have cordless phones. And so I got a call from a park ranger at Mount Rainier telling me that there had been an accident that John was involved in. Communication was down. We weren't going to hear a whole lot, but to sit tight, and they would be in touch. And then they hung up, and I was like, okay, I know the protocol here. I know, that's what they're supposed to do. That you always have to leave your information with the park rangers when you file your climbing plan and all that stuff. So I was like, it's fine. They're just letting me know that there was this, Anyway, as the day went on, I kept getting more phone calls and not getting a lot of information. But then I got a phone call from the battalion chief at the fire station where John worked. And he was real upbeat and happy. And he's like, hey, so is John by chance climbing today, or climbing the mountain right now? And I said, yeah, actually he is. How did you know? And he said, well, long story short, the fire department started getting all of the information over the EMS line, and they were tracking it, and they knew that he was up there. And so he's like, how about if I come over and hang out at the house. And I'm like, nah, it's fine. You know, I'm just waiting to hear from them. There's really no cause to be worried right now. But on the inside, I was starting to get a little more worried.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So another hour or so goes by. I call my family and tell them what's going on. And I'm like, just sit tight. You know, it's not an emergency yet. And then I get another call from the fire department again. And they're like, we're coming over. And anyway, long story short, it took hours. It took the whole day of communication back and forth. There was a blackout communication and all of this stuff. I did the climb, or the fall that they had happened at about just after 7 in the morning. I didn't get the call from the ranger until 9:45, and I didn't get the call from the rangers again confirming that he had died until about 2:30 in the afternoon.
Wow.
So it was all day of, you know, disbelief and wondering, no, this can't be real. And until I know for sure that he's gone, I'm going to hold out hope that he's not, you know, and that he's just hurt, but he's alive still. So I finally got the call from the ranger, like I said. And by this time, tons of people from the fire department had all showed up. The reason I found out later they wanted to come to my house is because word got out to the media that this was a firefighter from the city of Auburn. And so all the media started showing up at the fire station, wanting to talk to them. So they wanted to come to my house to head off all of this stuff in case, for whatever reason, word got out that it was us and where we lived and everything. And I'm very thankful that they came, because sure enough, you know, there were different news organizations that showed up outside of my gate wanting to talk to me and all of that. So I called my parents. My parents headed over. My sister lived in another state. So did my brother, and they both started making their way, coming from 2 different states. It was kind of a blur, and it was a huge, you know, gut punch of just coming to that acceptance that he really was gone. And like I said, I got that call about 2:30. Well, at 2:40, 2:45 is when my oldest son got off the bus. My kids were all at school, except for my youngest. She was home. So I had to go down and meet my son at the gate and tell him what happened, because he started walking up our road and saw all of the fire department rigs parked in the yard and everything. And he was just like, what happened? And so I had to tell him, you know, Daddy didn't make it this time on the climb. And he just got real quiet and just walked inside through the garage and went straight to his room. And then I had to wait about 20 minutes, 25 minutes for my other 2 school-age kids to come home. And so I was just sitting on the stairs, just praying, Lord, give me the words. How do you tell your kids this? And so they come walking up the driveway all laughing and everything until they see the fire department rigs too. And they're like, what's going on? And I told my then 10-year-old son, you know, that same thing, that Dad was in an accident and he didn't make it. And he was just in disbelief, didn't want to believe it. And then my daughter, Katie, who was 8 at the time, just kept saying, she was just crying. And she's like, I don't understand. What do you mean? I don't understand. And my 5-year-old daughter, Kelly, my kids were 12, 10, 8, and 5 when John died. So, she was just sticking to me like Velcro, didn't say anything, but wouldn't leave my side. And so the rest of the day was just a huge blur. You know, the fire department, they're amazing. You know, they're first responders. That's what they do. They jump in and organize and all of that stuff. By that evening, the rest of my family had showed up. Pastor from my church showed up, and it was just, like I said, it was kind of a blur.
Yes.
But it happened in an instant. I was 35 years old, had 4 young kids, and my life was changed instantly.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. And so he had climbed many times before.
Oh, yeah.
Like he'd done the same climb.
Yeah.
The same one, or okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so hard. Did they tell you what happened? Like,
oh, there's a lot of details involved in it, but
that's okay.
um, essentially the head climbing ranger, because John's climbing partner did survive, and so he had conversations with the ranger to say, did I do something wrong? Did he do something wrong? What happened? And they did all this investigating, and the conclusion they came to was that it was just a freak accident.
Wow.
And they call it an accident for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, nobody did anything
Yeah.
wrong. They were both very
Right.
experienced climbers. That that's what an
accident.
accident is.
Yeah. Oh, that's so hard. So you're left suddenly, 35, 4 young kids, totally in shock. I mean, what was life like? Let's talk about the next couple days, weeks. Like what was life like for you?
Oh gosh. Well, like I said, I was surrounded by a lot of people.
Yeah.
That came into the fire department was great about wanting to organize everything, you know, do a big service and all of that stuff. And I just let them run with that because, you know, this is anytime somebody in the line of service dies, even if it didn't happen, the accident didn't happen, they didn't die in the line of service, it's still a big deal.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to do that. And I said, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
We'll have this service, and then we'll do a reception at our church after. I was, a lot of that time, honestly, is just a big blur to me. I remember that night, I was exhausted. I couldn't sleep. You know, I laid there. I think I eventually fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, but I just laid there in my bed, and I woke up in the morning kind of in this fog, and I remember that I felt like I had been run over by a bus. Every muscle in my body hurt because of spending the entire day completely tense, every muscle tensed in your whole body, just waiting to get the news. And I woke up, and I remember the first thought was, oh my gosh, I got to tell John as soon as he gets home about this awful dream that I had. And then just as quickly you realize, wait a minute, I'm living that dream. He's not coming back. You know, it took the rest of the night prior to that to get his body off the mountain. That was an ordeal because of where it happened. It was very difficult for the climbers to get to him. And I finally got the call from from the medical examiner that they got him down and they had him. And it wasn't until about 6:30 that night. So, you know, all of those details working out and everything. But the next couple of days of, you know, it was just a blur. It was like, okay, what am I going to do here? I got to take care of my kids. I got to make sure they eat breakfast. I told them, you don't have to go to school. Like I said, this was June 3rd. It was just a couple of weeks of school left. Right. And I told them, if you don't want to go to school the rest of the year, you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's up to you. My oldest son decided to stay home. My second born son is, his way of dealing with grief was running away from it. So he's like, no, I'm going to school. Yeah. So he wanted to go. He wanted normalcy. He wanted everything to be the same. And then my 8-year-old daughter didn't go right away. I think she may have gone towards the end just to say goodbye to her friends and whatnot. But so everybody was home. I had, you know, people bringing meals, and my house was full of, you know, flowers and trees and all kinds of stuff. I had one of my best friends was coordinating meals for us, so I didn't have to think about cooking. But like I said, I honestly don't remember a lot about that time. I know we were taken care of, but it was just a big blur. And I think there was about 10 or 12 days in between when he died and when the service was going to be. And I can remember somewhere during that, probably about a week later or so, sitting on the floor in the office. My brother is a pastor, and so I asked him to do the service. And so he was sitting in John's chair at John's desk, writing up the words that he was going to say at the service. And life was a blur. It was crazy, but I remember this overwhelming sense of peace that I felt, that God said, you're going to be okay. You are not going to have to do this alone. Someday you're going to get married again, and you're going to have a partner to do life with, to help raise these kids. And I was like, Lord, I can't even think about that right now. And I was a little angry, but at the same time, I had this peace that I'm going to be okay. And I remember this very poignant moment where I had to make a decision. And I decided that I could either spend the rest of my life curl up in a fetal position and ask why, and demand of God, why did this have to happen to me? Or I could say, my kids just lost their dad. They cannot afford to lose their mom too. So whatever it looks like, I have to go forward. I have to choose to live, and I have to figure out a way to do this with God's help, because I don't know how to do this on my own, but choosing to check out is not an option.
True.
And if I never know this side of heaven why this had to happen, then I'm okay with that for now, because it'll drive me crazy trying to get the why.
Exactly. Yeah.
I may never know. And if I don't ever find out, what does that mean?
Right.
So, life went on. I was surrounded by a great group of friends that were my, they were like my family, but they just came alongside. They took us in. They did everything together. We did vacations together. We did holidays together. They just wanted to surround me and make sure that we were taken care of, especially the kids, and so that the guys would. My son Matt was playing baseball, and John was the assistant coach. My 10-year-old. John was the assistant coach. So the day after the accident, Matt had a baseball game, or a couple of days later, and he wanted to go. And so I took him to the game, and I just got these shocked and stunned looks from people like, what are you doing here?
Right.
I was, I'm going to be here for my son. He wants to do this. And so he played at the game, and people were treating me like I had the plague. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't know what to say, or they would just burst into tears.
Right.
And, and I'm just like, what do you want me to say? You're not the one who just lost her husband. I am, but I'm here. And so, life, we finished out the school year. Then we were into summer. I had the fire department, family come and do some projects around the house. We were in the middle of remodeling our bathroom. John was, and so they stepped in to help finish out that for me, do some yard work. I left. I took my kids to my sister's house. We were gone for about 10 days. And while I was gone, they did a bunch of projects around the house and the yard for me, things that were on our list of things to do. The house that we lived in, we actually had only bought 9 months before. So John only lived in that house for 9 months. It was going to be our forever home, for our kids, to raise our family. And we had these big plans for it and stuff. So, I just took one day at a time, and, life went on, and figuring out how to live and how to go forward. And then I don't know if I'd call it a wall, but I hit this point where I started getting angry. I was angry at God. I knew I had said that I would be okay if I didn't ever find out why, but I was mad that I had to wait. And so I had a very strong faith, but I was angry enough with God that I didn't want to talk to him. And so I had nothing to say to God for probably about 4 or 5 months. And I couldn't pray. There was just no words.
Yeah.
I knew in my heart, the scripture from Romans 8:26, I wrote it down. Let me find it here. Romans 8:26, where it says, also the Spirit helps us with our weakness. We do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself speaks to God for us, even begs God for us with deep feelings that words cannot explain. And so I knew that the Holy Spirit was interceding on my behalf and saying all the things to God that I couldn't say at the time. And I knew that God was there. I never felt like he had left me or that he was silent. I was just mad and I didn't want to talk to him. But I knew that he was there walking beside me and that at some point I would have something to say again. And so, like I said, that lasted about 4 or 5 months. And then it was just like the floodgates opened. And then I had the words and I could pray again. Wow. And during that whole time, of course, it's just all the new widowhood things that you go through.
Yes.
You know, all the things, the crying, all the, just being washed over with the memories that just come out of nowhere. John died June 3rd. June 14th was our first Father's Day.
Oh, wow.
Without him. And so we went over to my mom's house, just like we had planned to do for Father's Day. The whole family was there. And I recently looked back and saw some pictures of all of us. And it was just like a knife to my gut about how shocked and stunned we all looked. Yeah. Myself and my 4 kids. We were there, but we just had, the deer in the headlights look. And stuff. So there was just a lot of that, figuring out what do I do? How do I go forward? I think it was probably right around the time that I got my voice to pray back that God was impressing on me that it was time to take off my ring. It was time to go out in public and be seen as a single person now, be seen as a widow. Right. That was hard. It took multiple tries before I could get it off, but I finally did. And then I put it with John's ring on a chain around my neck, which I wore for a long time. And then I remember that was like a step in the right direction. Yeah. And I can remember feeling, I think part of it honestly was because the accident and the memorial service and everything was so public. I mean, we had 44 different fire departments represented at his memorial service, and they all brought apparatus. John was also an instructor at the State Fire Academy, so he taught a lot of firefighters literally all over the country. So I was getting cards and letters from people from other states saying, Captain Cahill was my captain at the academy. And I later found out that there was a whole group of media representing at the service too. And I said, I don't want them anywhere near us. I don't want them anywhere near my family, but they can be there as long as they stay in the back and stay away from us. And I found out later from somebody who watched it live in Connecticut.
Wow. Crazy.
On, I don't know what news outlet it was, but, so I felt like, a lot of my grieving was very public. A lot of my grief and what happened to us was very public. So going out places, I felt like I had this big red beacon on my head, that said, widow, flashing. Our license plate, we had a customized license plate and it was Cahill's, our last name. So I'm like, I'm going to drive anywhere. People are going to, recognize me from TV and see all of this. And so it was, that was challenging, but I knew that I was going to have to go out in public again. And God also, impressed on me that, I fulfilled my vows to John till death do us part. Yeah. And I honored those, but I am no longer married to him. And so I am now a single person. I have to act like that. I have to live like that. I have to accept that and everything that goes with that. Up until I would say I was probably 30 years old, I was extremely painfully shy.
Oh, really?
I hated wouldn't even like to order pizza because I'd have to talk to somebody I didn't know. I'd make John do it. If delivery people came to the door, I would make John get the door and all of that, because I was very, very shy. And right around the time I was 30, I just really started feeling comfortable in my own skin for the first time. Looking back, I think that was God preparing me, preparing my heart for what was coming. But I also realized what a control freak I am. When your life, the rug is yanked right underneath you in your life, and you have 4 young kids at home, you have to, or you feel compelled to control what you can. And so I couldn't stand to have my kids even go to a friend's house and be away from me. And if they were, I was just in a panic the whole time. I needed my chicks under my wing, so to speak. And so I became very controlling in my thoughts, my actions. I was determined I was never going to be caught off guard like that again. And so my answers were practiced. I thought long and hard ahead of time about, if somebody asks me a question, how am I going to respond? What would I say? I hated the blindside moments that came out of nowhere.
Yes.
I can remember, I was talking with my sister about this the other day. During the week between when John died and his service, I had to go get a black dress to wear for his service. And so she and I went together, and we get up to the counter. I hand it over to the checkout girl, and she's like, "Oh, it's a cute little black dress. Is this for a special occasion?"
Oh my goodness.
My sister, her mouth just dropped open, and she just, she was stunned. And I just smiled. I looked at her and I said, "No, it's for a family funeral." And that's all that I said. And she's like, okay, I'm sorry. And I just smiled, and we finished the process. And Laura, her mouth she just dropped open. She just stared at me, and we walked away, and she's like, "How did you even know what to say?"
Right.
And I said, "Because I thought about this. Somebody's going to ask me, why are you buying a black dress? And I'm going to have to respond. What am I going to say?"
Wow. You already knew.
And so that was just how I operated. I wasn't going to be caught off guard ever again. I hated that feeling. I hated not being in control. And so I became somewhat of a control freak about anything and everything. And I mean, it's been 20 years and I still find myself doing that. And I have to give myself permission to let go, So,
wow, that's amazing story. So what, it sounds like community was a big thing for you. You had a lot of community around helping you, and you had a great relationship with God. And I want to point out to the listeners that it's okay to be angry with God. It's okay to have that, he can understand it. He can take it. It's a good thing, and I love how you talked about the Holy Spirit interceding for us, that if you don't have words, it's okay. Like he's interceding for us. He's praying for us. And so I love that no one else has ever mentioned that on the podcast. So I love that you kind of took us down that journey of the emotions that you went through and all of that. Was there any specific like songs or verses that helped you through this time?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
I wrote them down because I have a bit.
All right.
Let's see. The best book that I have ever read on grief that I recommend to anyone is called A Grace Disguised: How the Soul Grows Through Loss by Jerry Sitzer.
I don't think I've read that, but I have heard that name. I'm going to have to get that.
Yes, it's an incredible book. In a nutshell, he lost his wife, his mother, and one of his daughters at the same time in a car accident.
Oh my goodness.
And when you have 3 major losses like that, it would be so easy if you could just lump them all together and grieve them all at one time, right? But you can't. The nature of your relationship with each of those people is unique and in and of itself, and you have to grieve them individually. And so it's one of those, I'm an avid reader. I devour books. And this this is a book that I would read a chapter and I would have to stop and chew on it for a while and process it before I could move on to the next chapter. That's how good it is. So
Wow.
it's an incredible story. And
Yes. I actually just remembered we have another podcast guest who recommended that as well. So awesome.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah,
Thanks for sharing that.
you're welcome. Verses, lots and lots of that. I'm in love with scripture and everything that God's word has, and there's so much in there. And I'm continually learning. Like I said, it's been 20 years now. But the two verses that I clung to and still cling to, I call them my bookends. These are the verses that God gave me to start my day and end my day. The first one that I start my day with is Lamentations 3:22 and 23, which says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." That tells me that every single day I open my eyes, God is going to give me what I need to get through that day. I don't have to have all the following days figured out. I don't have to have the next year figured out. I just have to get through that day. And God's going to give me every morning the mercies that I need to get through that day.
That's beautiful.
And then at the end of my day, he gave me Matthew 6:34, which says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own."
Yes.
And God tells me with that I got this. Tomorrow is a brand new day. You're going to have a whole new set of mercies for that day tomorrow. But today is enough trouble for today. So don't borrow trouble. Don't borrow that trouble for all the following days.
So good.
And then he gave me Psalms 4:8 to teach to my kids, which says, "I will lie down in peaceful rest. For you, O Lord, make me dwell in safety."
So good.
So when my kids were having those bad dreams, or as kids do, tend to think that death is contagious, it could happen to them, or it could happen to me or something else.
Yes.
So when they were afraid, and I had to learn that too, that God would let me sleep and have peaceful rest, no matter the chaos of the day that was following. Tomorrow has its own trouble. I don't need to worry about that. And the blessing in that was God let me sleep. I was able to sleep at night. I was able to get that rest so that I had what I needed to deal with the next day.
Oh, those are beautiful verses. Thank you.
I also mentioned Romans 8:26, but I love the whole chapter 8 of Romans. It's fantastic. But specifically, I also want to say Romans 8:38 and 39. From the New Century Version, it says, "Yes, I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor ruling spirits, nothing now, nothing in the future, no powers, nothing above us, nothing below us, nor anything else in the whole world will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord."
So good.
So I knew no matter what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, what had happened to me, nothing was going to take me out of the hands of God ever.
Right. So a big theme that I see is that you have been, when you were widowed, brand new widow, you were digging into scripture. You were looking for God to speak to you. You know, because a lot of times people speak to me, but they're not reading the Bible. I'm like, he speaks in many ways, but one of the biggest ways, you got to open the Bible and ask God to speak to you and start reading, and he will every time.
Yes.
There's going to be something. And I love that he gave you the bookends. That's beautiful. I love that he was telling you mercy's new every morning and do not worry about tomorrow. It's so good. I would highly recommend listeners writing down those two verses and reading them every morning, every night, or highlighting them in your Bible or your Bible app, and get in the habit. I'm going to do that, of reading those two verses every day. Or I think it's 3 verses, like those 2 different sections. Like, that's so good. That's great
share
advice.
them with anybody that asks. If you can give me a verse or 2, I'm like, I got 2 for you. They are.
I love that. That's beautiful. This is so good. So let's go back to your story. So you're learning how to live life again. You had taken off your wedding ring. You were kind of transitioning into, I'm a single woman. So tell us what happened after that.
Well, I spent about 2.5 years being a single parent and
That's hard.
navigating what that life was like. Um, I, I wrote down a bunch of notes, and I know you talk on the podcast with people that are newly widowed. You call them baby widows.
Yes.
I feel like I have kind of earned the title of veteran widow, if you
Yes,
will.
veteran widow.
I've
Yes.
been in the trenches. I have
Yes, you
fought the
have.
battles. And so I've learned a few things along the
Yes,
way.
please share.
The first thing, well, not the first thing, but gosh, I learned this: take one day at a time.
Yes.
Like I said, those two scriptures that I shared earlier, those were the bedrock for teaching me that I have to live one day at a time. Sometimes I
So
can
good.
just get through 1 minute at a time. But every day that you get through, when you look behind you, that's one day farther away from the event that so radically changed my life. That's one day closer to getting to the other side of this grief.
So good.
I had to learn that I'm not the one who died. My husband is the one who died. I'm still very much alive, and I have a lot to live for. My whole life, I've always felt like I'm going to live to be 100. Don't know why, but I was only 35 when I was widowed. That means I got 2/3 of life ahead of me to live still. So what do I want that quality of life to be like? Do I want to become bitter and angry and stuck in my grief, trying to figure out what happened, why it happened? I was determined that in 5 years, I was not going to be where I was at that time. I wanted to keep moving forward. Grief makes us do things out of character sometimes, things that we would never do, that we would never say.
True.
And I experienced that. And there was some shame that came with some of those things. And I had to learn how to give myself grace, because grief just is. It doesn't make any sense. There's no timeline. There's no order. You can go through all of learn the diagrams of grief and all the phases and the stages of grief. But I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of that meme of what grief should look like. It's a classic.
Oh,
You
yeah,
go around the circle and boom, and check all the boxes and you're done. But
yes.
the reality of grief is that it's like
Yeah,
this all over the
place. Yes.
And so it doesn't make sense. It just is. And, I've heard you talk, with yourself and with other people about those moments where you just find yourself crying out of nowhere.
Yeah.
They just, it comes up and it just blindsides you and it just hits you. And I learned that you just have to, just like you shared in your last podcast, you got to feel it.
Yes.
Because it's there. You can't avoid it. You can't stuff it. You can't get away from it. Let your kids see you cry.
Yes.
My youngest daughter would get so freaked out every time she would see me cry, because she thought that meant there was something wrong and that I was going to be next. And so it took a lot of time, but I would freely cry in front of my kids, and they're like, "Are you okay, Mom? Or is this just another grief thing?" And I'm like, "It's just a grief thing." I would found myself crying when I would drive in the car a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I learned how to cry and drive at the same time. I wouldn't have to pull over anymore, and it would just come when it comes. And I was unapologetic about that. It was like, just give me a sec, it'll pass.
Yes.
It's okay. I would like to also say to newly widowed people, beware of people telling you how to grieve.
Yeah.
True. No one has been in your shoes. Yes, we might share similar circumstances of we lost our spouses, but nobody has been exactly in your shoes. So, accept the advice and all of that, but take what you will and flush the rest. And just watch out for anybody who wants to come alongside you and tell you, this is what you have to do. This is how you do it. You're doing it wrong. All of those things,
So good.
Over those 2.5 years of being a single mom, I had to learn that you can't pour from an empty cup.
Very true.
Especially when there's kids involved. Take care of you. It's not selfish. It's absolutely necessary, and it's critical. So learn how to be a little selfish if that's the mindset you have to have, but it's okay to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Learn how to say no. Learn how to choose the very best for yourself. You don't have to accept everything, but you got to take care of yourself, because if you got nothing to give, how are you going to take care of those kids that so desperately need you? You know, I had to learn how to set aside my grief a lot so that I could help the kids in theirs. But mine was still there that had to be dealt with. And so sometimes I had to get away by myself, or, you know, go get a massage or whatever to take care of me.
Yeah.
Because I had to be. If I'm the only parent left, I had to be there and be my best to take care of them. I had to learn to accept help from others. Like I said, huge. I became a control freak, and accepting help from others was hard. I've heard many other people say it on their podcast, and I would absolutely echo it, that if you're trying to help somebody who's been widowed or is in a, difficult situation, do not ask them what they need, because they don't know.
Exactly.
We have no idea. But if somebody wants to do something for you, let them.
Yes.
I have a fantastic story about a really sweet friend of mine who, she and her husband were very good friends of ours. So she was also grieving the loss of John. And I remember she called me up one day and she's like, Debbie, I just want to do something for you. What can I do? And I was like, I don't know. I don't need anything. I've got everything. And she's like, I really feel like God's telling me to come and clean your floors. Is it okay if I come and clean your floors? And I said, my first gut reaction was to say, no, you can't come in my house. I don't want anybody to see that my house isn't clean and stuff. And so I just said, okay, sure. So she came over and she brought her mop and her broom and all that stuff. And she's like, please don't watch me. Just go do what you're going to do. I'm just here to take care of you. And I said, okay. And so I left for a little bit and I came back and she was just weeping as she's mopping my floor. I mean, uncontrollably weeping. And God just impressed on my heart so much that if I had told her no, I would have been denying her the blessing of helping me, and I would have been denying her the opportunity to grieve John the way that she needed to. And so when she finished, she just packed up her stuff, and she was still just, hiccuping, sobbing, and she just gave me a hug and walked out. Wow. And that, I have never, ever forgotten that, because my knee-jerk initial reaction was to say, no, I don't need that.
Right.
But that was something that she wanted to do for me. And so I had to let her. And that taught me a lot about the graciousness of helping other people, and how selfish it was of me if I would have said no. So obviously there's appropriate parameters and reason within what you allow people to do for you and accepting certain things. But that was so simple. It was just cleaning my floors. Not a big deal.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great lesson.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
Goodness.
You have so much wisdom. Like, this is like a really big treat to just sit here and hear all of your wisdom. We can all glean so much from this.
I also really want to emphasize that, I've heard people talk, especially baby widows, or even people like you that are under 5 years, how hard that first year is, and all of the firsts and all of the memories that go along with that. And again, I was in that state of mind where I was not going to be caught off guard. I hated being blindsided. So I would get, as I'm leading up to the day, whatever it is, the first anniversary, the birthdays, all the things, I was preparing for every possible scenario that could happen that day, whatever possible, how grief is going to hit me on that day. And I was prepared for it. And then the day would come and I'd get through the end of the day and I'd go, okay, not so bad. Check
Yeah.
that box. And then about 2 days later, I would have what I call a grief processing day where I could hardly get out
Oh,
of bed.
wow. Wow.
So it would hit me, but it wouldn't hit me on the day because I was so preparing for it.
Yeah.
But it would always come about 2 days
Interesting.
later. And so I called those processing days.
Wow.
And my family and my friends came to learn that, the day of the thing that we were celebrating, the birthday, the anniversary, whatever, it was just let's get through it so we can have this behind us. But they knew that it was coming. And it really caught me off guard at first when it happened. But then I came to expect it. And so, I remember getting through all of those things, the firsts. And I had my tribe, as you call it, with me, to go through all of those things together with me. But let me tell you, the second year was way harder than the first for me, because the second year, the first were done. This was now my new reality. This is my new normal. And it really, really hit me hard, especially at the holidays, that these friends and these people that had walked through all of this stuff with me, right by my side for so long, they were getting back to life. Their lives were impacted for sure by losing John, but they weren't changed forever in the way that mine was. And so they were able to get back to their new normal and find that again. And that was very, very difficult for me, because all of a sudden I started feeling like a third wheel. All of these people that had come alongside of us, they were all couples or families. And all of a sudden I'm the third wheel. I don't have that partner with me at all these things. And it was starting to get a little uncomfortable. My kids were starting to notice too. And as hard as it is to realize, I had to come to the realization that not all of your tribe is in it for the long haul, with the exception of your family. Some of them certainly are, but God brings people into our life for seasons.
True. Yeah.
And, some of them drift away or walk away altogether, and that's okay. They were with me during that critical time of learning all these things, learning who I am, who God wants me to be, discovering all these new things about myself. But this is my reality now. And it's different. And the nature of my friendship with some of these people before was as a couple. And when you're not friends as a couple anymore, they don't really know what to do with you, or you start to feel like they're sticking with you out of a sense of obligation more so than being in it on the long haul. Now, that's not true for everybody, for sure. I still have some people that are, I might not talk to them for months, might not see them for 6 months or a year, but when we get together again, it's like it was yesterday. But I had to, 2 years into this, I had to grieve another loss, and that was the loss of some of my tribe that I thought was going to be with us forever, that I thought were going to be our forever family. People that made promises to my kids to take them to the baseball games and the football games and stand-ins to do all the dad things. And then they got too busy or they just forgot. That's hard. And so it was hard. It was really hard. I love my fire department family, but it was especially hard with the fire department people because they're really good at being first responders. They know what to do in the midst of an emergency right then and there, but they don't know what to do years, months later, years later. And a dear friend of mine, we go to the same church together. He was one of John's battalion chiefs who came to my house that day. And I talked to him about it. And I said, I'm trying really hard not to be bitter, because so many of the guys in the department promised my kids that they were, they'd said the words of, you're always going to, have family in the fire department, and we'll take you to all the things and do all the stuff with you that your dad used to do. And then my kids would say, how come they don't come around anymore? How come, do they not love us? Do they not care about us anymore? And how do you explain that to kids? And so it was like a whole nother layer of loss that I had to learn and to grieve on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So along with that, I learned that, time doesn't erase grief. It changes. Mm-hmm. There's another scripture. I recently discovered this one, and it's like, wow, this is so true. It's Ecclesiastes 1:18. And it says, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief.
Wow.
So the more you learn about grief, the deeper you feel it. It's not necessarily the gut-wrenching punch in the gut type of grief, but it's a very, very deep understanding of what it is. Mm-hmm. And so grief and joy live side by side. It's not one or the other. It's a both and. Mm-hmm. And so that was during this time, I was living with my grief, knowing that it's something that I will carry with me the rest of my life. I can get to the other side of it. It has changed me forever, but I'm always going to grieve the loss of John till the day I die. Always. It changes. Like I said, it's not that gut-wrenching feeling anymore, but it's an ever-present thing that's always there. That does not mean that I don't have an incredible and joyful, very full life. They live side by side. They coexist. There is room for both in my heart.
So true.
Also, during those 2 years, I learned to make new traditions.
Yes, that's so good.
A lot of people keep doing the same thing that they always did with their spouse to honor their spouse. And that's appropriate for a time, but it's totally okay to make those new traditions.
Yes,
because
for sure.
You want those previous traditions that you had to be sacred and tied to the memory of that person for what they were. But it doesn't mean you have to keep doing them, because they're not there anymore. It's okay to do new things and to make new traditions. And it doesn't mean you're canceling them out or somehow putting them on a shelf or forgetting them because you stopped doing it. You're just making new ones, and you have to do what's best for you. And maybe some of those things that you did is because, well, we always did it that way because that's what Dad wanted. But it's okay to make those new traditions.
That's so good.
So please do that. Oh gosh, what else?
It's the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I learned, I think I talked about this earlier about, new widow advice. I also learned, here's some practical advice for if you are a person who's walking side by side with somebody who's been widowed, but you don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. I learned, because I experienced this from a really good friend of mine, practice the ministry of presence.
So good. Yep.
I found this, Job 2, chapter 2, verse 13 says, for 7 days and nights, Job's friends sat silently on the ground beside him because they realized what terrible pain he was in.
What a beautiful illustration of what we want our friends to be. Yeah.
Yes. Practice the ministry of presence. Sometimes words aren't necessary. Just be there. Just sit with them. Sit with them in their grief. Let them cry. Hold their hand. Give them a hug. But you don't have to say anything. I can't tell you how many people came up to me, and whether it was in person or in cards and letters, I have a box, like I said, of cards and letters I got from people all over the country that were impacted by John's life that I didn't even know about. I learned a whole side about my husband that I had no idea.
Yeah.
till after he was gone. But, people that are compelled to say, I know how you feel, or,
No.
whatever, those dumb things.
Don't
They're in a
say it.
better place now, or
Oh,
God must have
yeah.
needed them in heaven more than
Yeah.
you did here on, or, all those things.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
no, just
No.
say you're
Mm-mm.
sorry and give them a hug. And that's all that they need to hear. They just
I
want
think,
to know that you're in
yes.
it with them.
Less is
So,
more as far as your words. Don't try to
yes,
say all these
yes,
things and yeah.
exactly.
Oh yeah, those are
You
some.
can't fix it. You can't fix
Mm-hmm.
it for them.
Nope.
Don't feel like you have to. Don't feel
Right.
like you have to say something, because, you know, unless you've walked in their shoes, like I said earlier, you can't grasp what they're feeling, what they're going through. People like you and I that have walked this road, we have a lot of wisdom to impart to people. But for somebody who's, my husband did not die from cancer like yours did. I didn't watch him slowly die. So
Mm-hmm.
who am I to tell somebody or to tell you how you're supposed to grieve in that
Right.
situation? So
Yeah.
just, be there, to love them, and to only use words when it's necessary.
Yeah. That's so good. So,
So,
what would you say has been the most challenging thing about being widowed?
okay. I would say discovering my own faith, my very own faith, not the faith that I was raised in my church, not my parents' faith, not the coattails of my husband's faith, but
Right.
my own faith. What do I believe? During those first 4 or 5 months when I had nothing to say to God and I was mad, you know, everything was stripped away, and it was like, okay, it's just me and God here. What do I really believe?
So good.
Do I believe all these things that I've been taught my whole life? Is it mine? Do I really own this faith now? And I had to discover that and say, yes, absolutely, I do. But I didn't come to that conclusion of owning my own faith until I was widowed.
Wow.
Because I was raised in the church. I was raised by great parents, but my faith, it was my decision to accept the Lord for sure. But when everything is stripped away and there's nothing left but just you and God, what do you really believe?
True.
So that was a
good.
journey.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that is rediscovering my identity.
Yes.
Who am I?
Yep.
I'm not John's wife anymore. I'm not a fire department wife or spouse. Who am I? Not as a mom, not as a friend, not as a daughter, not as John's wife or John's widow, but who am I? And I discovered that I'm a daughter of the King of the universe. That's what defines me. And that's the only thing I want as my identity. All the other stuff is just an expansion of that, but that is who I am. And that's what I had to learn. Because like I said, I was young when I married John. I started dating him when I was 19. I was 20 when we got married. I finished growing up with him. I really did. I never lived on my own. I went away to college for a year and lived in a dorm, but then I came back home and lived at home until I got married. And, I was very, very dependent on John. And my identity was wrapped up in that, very much so. And so it took something like having all of that stripped away to learn, who am I? And like I said earlier, I started feeling comfortable in my own skin when I was about 30. It took that long. And that was God preparing me for this discovery of, I'm your daughter, Lord, and I'm a daughter of the King of the universe. That is who I am.
So good.
So that was the most
many.
challenging thing for me.
Yeah. Oh,
I would say.
good.
Well, and obviously being a single parent.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's a whole nother podcast.
Right. I have a feeling we're going to need to have you on for more than one. You have a lot of wisdom that we can all really benefit from. So I have a feeling I can think of all these other ones I want you to do
for sure.
that would help us. And specifically, we don't have time for like the big long story, but I want to maybe have you back for that. But I do know that you're remarried And so
Yes.
could you give us just a quick overview? And then I would like to, at some point, if you would like to, have you back on to tell us, like, because I think you'll have
Of
a lot of
course.
wisdom to share with all of us about dating again and what that's like. Because I feel like we can't
Yeah.
get into that right now. That would be another hour probably. So
Oh,
just
at least. Yeah.
really quickly give us like the quick version of about you and your current husband, and then I'd like to have you back to explain it all later. But
Sure.
um,
The quick version is that we met in a grief support class at
oh
our church.
really? Wow.
Yeah. So Dave was widowed himself.
Okay.
We attended the same church. This was, we've been married for 17 years now,
Okay.
17 and a half years. Um, there was no such thing as grief share back then, but our
Mm.
church was putting together a class called Grace in the Valley. And it was
Okay.
about, grief. And so he and I were each independently asked to come join this class to go through the facilitator training to lead
Mm.
these groups. And
Wow.
that's where we met each other. Um, we he and I were probably the youngest in our group. There was another family that had lost a son, another couple that had lost a newborn child, and then another older woman who had lost her husband, but she was, late 60s, early 70s. So Dave and I was 37 or 38 at the time. And he was in his early 40s. And so we were kind of the younger people in the
Yeah.
group. So every night after this class, I think it lasted about 8 weeks or so. So every night this class was down in the church basement. So all of us as a group were talking as we're going back up the stairs out to the parking lot. And Dave and I would just talk a lot about kind of expanding more on what we had learned in the class and comparing things and all of that. And we just became really good friends talking about this. And then our we'd get to our car, and then I'd get in my car, and we'd stand there talking a little bit longer each time and stuff. And at the end of our classes, he pulled me aside and he said, I really appreciate your wisdom in all of this, because I was about a year ahead of him in the process, the grief process. And he said, would you ever consider, getting together for lunch or coffee or something like that outside of our class, now that our class is over, to continue talking about this? And I was like, sure, I'd be willing to do that. And by this time, and I'll explain more on another podcast about what happened prior to that. But by this time I was like, okay, Lord, I'm starting to feel this. I'm really curious to see if anything's going to happen with this. And so we said, sure, we'll get together. So we met for lunch. And again, our lunch lasted about 3.5, 4 hours. We shut the restaurant down.
Aww.
And he asked if I would be interested in, long story short, his grief work was he bought a house to remodel. And so during our whole 8 weeks of class, he was explaining to everybody the progress on the house. And he's like, we're really close to where this house is. Do you want to come by and see what would happen, or to see what I have done so far? And so I'm like, sure. So we go to his house after lunch, and he's walking around showing me all this stuff. And he started telling me, he had lines drawn on the floor and on the walls, and just sharing some ideas with me. And I was like, well, that's really cool. What if this happened over here, and what if this happened over here? And then pretty soon, over the course of the hour or so of being there, all of a sudden we started using the word we. Well, what if we did this?
Cute.
What if we did this? And it was like something was happening. And we were like, this is, are you feeling what I'm feeling? It was just like this instant spark in chemistry. Later that night, we had to go back to church because it was the ministry kickoff dinner for the fall. So we sit next to each other, and there was just this instant chemistry and spark, and other people in church that had seen us becoming friends and had seen us sitting together and talking and all that were kind of like giving us the side eye, like, what's going on here? So later that night, he lived really close to the church, and he would always walk, but it was chilly because it was fall. So I said, you want me just to give you a ride home really quick? So I drove him back to drop him off at the house, and we sat in the car for and talked for, probably an hour, hour and a half. It was late. And long story short, at the end of that night, we had talked about what we were both feeling, and we knew that we were going to get married.
Wow.
So we had one date, and we knew that we
And
were
you
going to get
knew.
married, and we knew. And I told you, I heard the audible voice of
Yeah.
God tell me. I heard it was earlier. I'll tell you that story later, but God told me audibly. I thought there was a man talking behind me, that,
Wow.
you know, that Dave was going to be part of my future. And
That's
this was
amazing.
months before we ever did the class. So anyway, we knew that we wanted to get married, but then it was like, okay, now we got to catch the kids up to speed here. So I have 4, he has 3.
Yeah.
His were older than mine, but we would have gotten married the next day if we
Yeah.
could have. We just knew. So that was in September. So then we started just doing stuff as a big family, having the kids come along, introducing my kids. They knew who Dave was because they had seen him at church, and I introduced him as my friend and stuff. And so
Right.
After about 2 months, he, unbeknownst to me, sat my kids down and said, I have fallen in love with your mom.
Oh,
and he said, I feel like God has put me in your guys' life to be part of your family. And he said, I will never, ever try and take your dad's place.
Good. Good man.
Your dad was an amazing man. I want to, your mom and your dad, taught you guys right, built this incredible foundation for you. I don't ever want to take that away, but I want to build on that. So I won't ever try and force myself on you as your dad, but I count it an honor and a privilege to be a dad in your life. If I ask your mom to marry me, do you give me your permission?
Wow.
And see, I think he asked my boys that. And they said yes. And he later told me that if they had said no, then he wouldn't have proposed.
Wow.
Because he's like, I'm not going to do that to those kids.
Wow.
So we got engaged in November, and we got married on St. Patrick's Day, 2007. So.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so, you've been married since then. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. You've got a powerful, powerful story. And I'm so thankful that you came on here to share today. I know that it's going to bless so many people. We're in over 80 countries, and people, all over the world are going to hear your story. And I really appreciate you being open to sharing all of this and giving us all so much wisdom. Because it's like, if this is how I was actually telling my oldest son this yesterday, it's like, if I had to go through this, I want to help other people, and I feel like you're the same way. And I actually see that a lot within our Widow Too Soon community page. You are really good about commenting on everybody's stuff and giving great advice. And I really appreciate that.
Sure.
As it really helps people out. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close in prayer, and then we'll be done. So God, I just thank you so much for Debbie. Thank you for her willingness to share her story. Just so much wisdom that you've imparted to her that she can help all of us with. And I just pray that this just reaches the people who need to hear this, need to hear her story and her wisdom and all the things that you've showed her. I just pray blessings over her marriage and her family and her kids and her grandkids and all that she has going on in her life. And I just thank you for every single listener that's here today. I just pray again for the peace that passes all understanding to cover them today. God, that they will take those verses that were shared and just really meditate on them, the new mercies every morning, and that we don't need to worry about tomorrow, and just all those good verses that you've given us. And I just pray that that helps all of us with what we're dealing with. And we just thank you for what you've done. Amen. Well, if you like this podcast, give it a little bing, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you have a moment to write a little review. That really helps get the word out to other people. And again, speaking about the Widow Too Soon community, if you have not joined our page, please look for Widow Too Soon community on Facebook, or there's a link in the show notes. And we'd love to have you as part of that. It is growing so fast. Like I checked today, there's 45 new requests. I cannot keep up. So it takes me a little bit of time because I have to go through and I want to make sure everyone's like actually widowed. There's been a few scammers recently that I've slipped through. So I have to take the time. But the good thing, other people are watching and telling me. So if there's anything shady, and it's not a dating site. So let me know. I had to remind people of that one day because it started to kind of look like it was like, no, we're just about friendship here and supporting each other. And there's other groups for that. But anyways, we appreciate all of you guys listening. And Debbie, again, thank you for being here. I'm so excited with what God's going to do with this. I might have shared this on another podcast. I can't remember, but it was kind of like a vision, like this thought like flashed in my head the other day. And it was about like all of these podcast guests, and they all had megaphones. And it was like God was saying, I'm now giving voices to all these people who might not ever, be in a place where they're in 80 countries all of a sudden. And like, it just was this beautiful picture, because there was a time, and listeners know this, that I wasn't sure if I was going to continue the podcast. And God made it very clear that I should change it and to do these interviews. And it's just been beautiful to see what's happening. Not only is it giving voice to all these stories, the podcast is growing like crazy. And, there's more people becoming part of the community, and it's been absolutely beautiful. So anyways, Debbie, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And listeners, we will see you next time. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Widowed Too Soon with Michelle Bader Ebersole. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, rate and review. And we'd also love for you to join our Widowed Too Soon community on Facebook. See you next time.